partner at. Thank you. And as you can tell, this meeting is being recorded, and there's a ginormous lorry in the background, so this is live. So good morning, everybody. My name is James Kidd. I'm a partner at Mills and Reeve, and I'm joined by my colleague.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Cockrell. I'm a principal associate at Mills and Reeve.
So together we're going to talk to you about the flexible furlough scheme. Yes, the joke has already been made about what does FFS also stand for. We're not going there, government. You hopefully thought about that, but we didn't come up with that reference. So this is a webinar, so everybody is muted apart from us and your videos are off. We welcome questions through the Q&A system, so put them in. We'll try and get to as many as we can. We do get quite a lot of questions. We can't answer all of them, but we will look at them in between who's speaking. And if we get time at the end, we'll try and do a wash up. Not quite sure how long we're going to be. We will finish at 11 o'clock, but it depends on quite how quickly this is going to go through. So this is being recorded, as you know. We're doing a number of these this week across our offices in the country. There will be some polls which will pop up through. Please do participate in those. Brilliant. Fish finger sandwich is the FFS. That's exactly what I was referring to. Thank you very much. Always good. Comfort food. Fish finger sandwich. I would always say with ketchup, not brown sauce, but that's personal preference. There we are. Before you go at the end, if you could give us some feedback, constructive, nice feedback. If it's negative, don't bother. But about how it's been, that would be good. Okay, so not only are we talking about the flexible furlough scheme, we're also going to touch on a couple of other recent developments and what's coming through the pipeline. So, you know, funnily enough, employment law is continuing during lockdown and not just about furlough. Okay, so that's Rebecca and I, or Rebecca and me, if you were here for that bit of the exciting debate about grammar. That's what we're going to be talking about. Flexible furlough scheme, quick overview, some detail. We did think long and hard about whether we're going to go into the maths, i.e. how you calculate the pay. Rebecca fortunately got that slide, didn't you?
I did. Yes. It's always convenient, that, isn't it?
Wasn't by design, I promise, as you know. But we're not going to tax you with algebra this morning, don't worry. And then between us, we'll pick up some of the other stuff. Okay, I think we've covered all of those points in housekeeping. You're very welcome. So, Rebecca.
Okay, so as James said, we'll start with just a very high level overview of the key points and what's changed, and then we'll go into a bit more detail on each point as we progress through the webinar. So, first key point is that you're not allowed any new entrants to the furlough scheme after 1st of July. There are some more complexities around that, which I will come to in a minute. We're also seeing now that the government has recognised that as the furlough scheme tails off, it won't just be off the edge of a cliff in the sense of one day you're furloughed fully and you're not undertaking any work, and next day suddenly your full-time job is available. They accept that in some situations that won't always be the case. So from 1st of July onwards, they're recognising that you can do some work and still be furloughed for other parts of your normal working week. So there is this gradual reintroduction to the workplace, which is available, but you don't have to take it. We're also seeing that there's been an introduction of cap of numbers from the 1st of July, which James will go into in a bit more detail. And we're also seeing that rather than it being a cost neutral system, from 1st of August, there will be a gradual introduction of employer contribution. So it won't anymore be from 1st of August completely neutral to have an employee on furlough. You will have some costs associated with that. Now, I would caveat all that we're saying is this is based on the guidance that was published late on Friday, but we still haven't received the Treasury direction. Now, the Treasury direction is the formal notification to HMRC as to how to run the scheme and exactly what the rules should be. We hope that it will accurately reflect the guidance. They're being written by the same people, the government, it should do. Though I would just flag in previous iterations of the furlough scheme, we have had some instances of slight conflicts. between the Treasury Director and the guidance, though they have been ironed out. So we'd hope that won't happen again, but obviously we are still anticipating the formal direction at some point.
Thanks, Rebecca. And we've had feedback already that it's Rebecca and me, not Rebecca and I. So I'm glad.
Okay, good.
The burning issue this morning is grammar. Yeah. Excellent.
My LinkedIn post was wrong then, people. I accept that.
I think it's more complicated than that, perhaps, but I'm not clever enough for that. Okay, so let's have a poll. Let me launch a poll on: do you plan to use the flexible furlough scheme? So have a look at that. I'll share those results in a second. It's a pretty strong response, I think it's fair to say. So 80% of you have voted. I'm going to treat that as 81% of you. If you haven't voted yet, you're deliberating. What was that Lloyd Grossman phrase? Whatever. So there you go. 78% of you are going to use the flexible furlough scheme, and that is why you're here, surely. So let me get rid of that. Key dates. So we covered some of this on a previous webinar and the detailed, and as Rebecca says, the first date that employers start becoming responsible for paying for the cost of the job retention scheme or the furlough scheme is the 1st of August. And as you can see on the slide, employer becomes responsible for auto enrolment and the 13.8% employer national insurance contributions. And then from the successive months, not only the NICs and the pension, 10% from the 1st of September and 20% for the final month of October. So how do I see that playing out? I think there are a number of scenarios, and we'll probably come into this with some degree of trepidation, but the flexible furlough scheme is there. You don't have to use it. You can take everyone off furlough and bring them back in. You can leave everyone on furlough, provided you get to the specific dates, which we'll come to in a second. I think there are 3 scenarios that are going to play out over the next X number of months. So the first is, well, it's just that we leave everyone on furlough, and then we come to the end of October, and then we bring everybody back. Everybody comes back on their previous terms before we went into effectively lockdown, and either come back full-time, part-time, whatever it might be. But we haven't made redundancies, and the employers have borne the costs on that rising scale during that period. That's possible. The second scenario is that we're into flexible furlough scheme, and we are going to start varying from the 1st of July. So we're going to have some people working, some people on furlough during each week, and we're going to have that flexibility, and therefore our costs are going to go up because we're paying people for the work they're doing, and we're getting the benefit of the scheme for the time when they are not working. Okay, whatever works. I think it's going to be interesting to maximize flexibility from those employees, and as we will see, that's by agreement. Key point that you need to take away from today. Now, the third scenario is the negative scenario, isn't it? We're hearing about this already, which is that actually there are redundancies coming. We're already hearing about there are lots of redundancies. I think there will be tens, hundreds of thousands of redundancies. I saw in the BBC News alert today that the number of people on payroll has gone down by something like 600,000. I think we are heading towards a serious number of redundancies. So the question is going to be when and how. And so when are these going to bite? Are they going to bite before the employer starts paying anything on the 1st of August, in which case, if you're in collective, you really need to have got on with that? Or is it going to bite before the 1st of September with that 10% cost that you're going to have to pay? Will flexible furlough scheme avoid redundancies? Maybe, or will this be actually a combination of redundancies and flexible furlough? I think probably the latter, but we'll see. Okay, I'm just going to put up another poll. Sorry. This is about ending furlough. Let me So do you intend to bring employees back from furlough at the point the government grants starts to reduce? So, as I say, 1st of August or 1st September, depending upon costs. So I'm just going to we're about half of you have voted so far. I'll just let that tick up for a couple of seconds more while we look at that. It's nowhere near as stark as the results from last time, which is interesting. Okay, most of you have voted. I'm going to close that now. So most people, only 50% though, so it's quite finely balanced, I would say. 50% will bring people back at the point this is going to start costing you money. So 1st of August. Makes sense. Okay. So, Rebecca.
Okay, so we've looked at it at a high level, and we're now just going to have a look at a bit more detail about some of the points. So first of all, the point about you're no longer allowed to join the scheme after the 1st of July. So there are some more complexities to that, because essentially to be successfully furloughed, you need to have been furloughed for 3 complete weeks. So what this means is if you're a new entrant to the scheme, so you've never been furloughed before, you're not rotating staff 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off, however you want to do it, they're completely new, they've not been furloughed before, then you would have need to have furloughed those staff by 10th of June, because that's the only way they then get 3 complete weeks of furlough prior to the 1st of July, so have been successfully furloughed prior to 1st of July. That obviously adds some, I did see, and I had some clients rushing to therefore meet the 10th of June because they were aware that potentially they were needing to furlough further staff. So it was fairly arbitrary, but you can see the logic of it needing to stop at some point. So once you've identified that, is there any exceptions? Yes, there are some exceptions, and we'll go into a bit more detail. The first is for administrators. So when I say administrators, that's where the business is going bust, an administrator steps in to try and rescue it. Technically, they're not the employer. They become the employer. They're a new separate legal entity, but the government recognises that actually they can step into the shoes of the business that they're managing and continue to furlough staff in accordance with the rules. So they don't get any special treatment. They just can and able to follow the furlough rules and continue to furlough staff if they're already furloughed. There are also a couple more exceptions that we'll come on to, so where you have someone on statutory family leave, and also where there's a 2P scenario, so whether staff are 2Ping in or 2Ping out. And I've already had a few instances of that in business sales and also service provision change, which I think James will cover in a bit more detail shortly. So yes, there is a 1st of July deadline, but for new entrants, actually that's the 10th of June, slightly confusingly.
Yeah, or was the 10th of June. Yeah.
Yeah, it's gone.
So you can see what the government is trying to do. The furlough scheme is costing billions, and they're saying, "Ooh, let's actually start putting some brakes on here." So what they're saying is, and not only do we have that cut-off date of the 10th of June, as Rebecca's talking about, but also there is a numbers cap. So as it says on the slide, and I'm going to read that a bit. So the number of employees you can claim for with effect from the 1st of July for any period of not less than a week, that is your claim period, 7 days, not 5, cannot be more than the maximum number of employees you claim for in any claim before the 30th of June. So it's not about the amount of money, it's about the number. So in a hypothetical example, if in any 3-week period prior to the end of June, you had 100, your maximum was 100 employees on furlough, from the 1st of July, you can only have a maximum of 100 employees on the furlough scheme. So if you had a variety of numbers, but the maximum was 100, you can have 100 with some exceptions. Just picking up one of these exceptions, the other one is the family-friendly leave. So if there is a TUPE transfer in, there's lots of complicated stuff, but the broad point is this: if there is a TUPE transfer in and the employees who transfer over were or are on furlough, then the new employer, the transferee in that scenario, is able to increase its cap by the number of employees who were employed by the old employer, the transferor, as that maximum pre-transfer. So if there was 100 pre-transfer with the old employer and the new employer had 200, they're not restricted to 200, their number goes up to 300. There's a bit more to it than that, but that's the broad number. The oddity in relation to furlough and TUPE is that there are two types of a TUPE transfer, what we call a classic transfer and a service provision change. Classic transfer is where company A buys the assets of company B and the employees therefore transfer from A to B. So mergers and acquisitions stuff. Service provision change is outsourcing. So company A outsources its cleaning contract to contractor, or that contract goes to a succession of contractors and then might go back in-house. So outsourcing. The way it's drafted, furlough and TUPE will only apply for the classic transfer, not for the service provision change. Why, you might ask? The good question. No good reason why. So if you are in a situation between now and the end of October and you are outsourcing or there is a next generation contract, you need to think very carefully, if there are people on furlough, about extending that contract so you're outside of the furlough scheme, because otherwise you will have a problem with your maximum number. Okay. Rebecca, on statutory leave.
Okay, so the other exception was prompted by the Maternity Action Group writing to the government and flagging what they recognised was potentially quite a significant issue, in that individuals on maternity leave who are due to return after 10th of June or 1st of July would potentially face coming back to no work to be able to do if their business is still closed or severely reduced, and therefore face redundancy because they were after the 10th of June or 1st of July cut-off date for being able to join the scheme, and also, as James has just explained, may push the employer over their cap as to the number of employees they can have on the scheme at any point. So Maternity Action flagged this, the government responded and recognised that wasn't the intention, so they have introduced an exception to allow those employees who are returning from any kind of statutory family leave, so maternity, adoption, shared parental, paternity leave, etc., to be able to join the furlough scheme after the 1st of July cut-off. So they don't need to have been furloughed by 1st of July, so, or 10th of June if they're a new entrant, and they won't count towards the cap, so there will be an additional number on top of the cap. This is really good news, and I did have conversations prior to the 10th of June discussing with clients about actually do we flag to maternity leavers if they're reaching the end of their maternity leave period, potential for furlough, because of the risk that after 10th of June that they wouldn't be able to be furloughed workers. This obviously has now gone away. Would have been helpful if they'd notified us before 10th of June, but you know, nothing's perfect, and at least we do now know that those maternity leavers, returners, are able to be furloughed. So that's some reassurance to them. They can stick to their original plans and still have the option of furlough if that's still applicable. They would have to meet all the other eligibility criteria. So, for example, have been on your payroll on the 19th of March, I think it was, and obviously all the other aspects of needing to be a furloughed worker, so either not working or having an agreement about part-time work, etc. But they can be furloughed, so that's some good news.
Okay, so using my example of the employer that had 100 employees maximum at any one time in a claim period before the end of June. So if you've got some returners, obviously that will go up by 1 for every returner from statutory family leave. Okay. So total flexibility, which is sounds like a Hollywood trailer. Under the flexible furlough scheme, let's take a week. Let's take an employee who works 35 hours in that week. If that's the case, you can, keyword, agree with that employee that they will work a pattern, which is, say, 1 hour 1 hour they work for you, you pay them as normal for that hour, and the other 34 are on the furlough scheme, or they'll do 17.5, whatever it might be. That is your work pattern, and you pay them as normal for the hours that they work, and then for the hours that they are not working, they're on the furlough scheme, and they'll get the 80% / 2.5K. Easy to say. Rebecca's got the next slide, which is about how you actually calculate that. Well done, Rebecca. There are claim periods of a week, so 7 days, as I talked about. There is no minimum, so it could be that you are furloughing for 1 hour, 10 hours, 34 hours in that situation. No obligation to use a flexible furlough scheme. You can just leave people on full furlough if you want to. Key point though, which I think is we need to be very wary of, which is you must get an employee's agreement to this. You can't just say, haha, with effect from the 1st of July, you're now working X hours, you're now working Y hours, whatever it might be. And I suspect the needs of employer are going to be very much, I quite know how much I'm going to need. So there has to be a huge element of variation and flexibility in that. But as with everything, you can't just use, well, I'm the employer, you will do as I say. It has to be by consent. And you've got to take into account the underlying employment law that sits behind the furlough scheme. So remember, the furlough scheme is just the government's way of giving some cash to employers, hopefully to avoid too many redundancies. All of our employment law that we've been all dealing with for years and years and years still sits there, doesn't it, in terms of not discriminating against people, treating people reasonably, and not exposing ourselves unnecessarily to risk. So on that basis, if I go to Rebecca and say, Rebecca, so with effect from the 1st of July, instead of working 35 hours a week, will you work 5 hours a week, and I'll obviously pay you as normal for that? You may well say, well, yes, but actually I've got some other issues, which means I can't do that particular pattern, or I want some certainty as to when those hours are going to be. And it's reaching agreement. The bit that comes out of the information we've got is that you need to document that agreement. So I need to write to Rebecca and say, we've agreed that in week 1, you're going to do these hours and I'll pay you as normal for that. And perhaps I can say in week 2, I'm going to do that. You could do it on a week by week, or you can have certainty or flexibility there. I need to keep that record for 5 years. And I need to keep a very accurate record of the hours that the employee actually works and the hours, therefore, that they're on furlough. And you should not be submitting claims under the furlough scheme until you know definitely how many hours have been worked and therefore how many hours are on the furlough scheme. Now, interestingly, it's not a condition of the scheme for the employee to document their agreement. So to use my example, I say to Rebecca, we have agreed that you will do X pattern. I don't need to say to Rebecca, please confirm by email, text, signing letter, whatever, that we've agreed this. I have agreed it with her, and I am documenting that agreement. Those of you who are hardened HR professionals will know that things get lost, don't they, in translation sometimes. It is perhaps better with a smaller number of employees to record the employee's consent to that rather than just recording the oral agreement in a letter. That's not a bad thing, but better to have actually got the person to actively agree to it. So yes, I agree to that work pattern. That might create a barrier because it might take them longer to come back to you. But the flip side, of course, is that all of that is hopefully employees will think, oh, hang on a minute, this is my opportunity to get back to work. This is good news, subject to childcare, caring responsibilities, all that stuff. And therefore will get paid 100%, particularly if they've only been on the cap under the furlough scheme. So they might see it as a positive, but we'll get some, no doubt, reluctant returners as well. Okay, I think that's you, Rebecca, next.
Yes. So the joy of calculating furlough payments. What I would say is that there is detailed worked examples on the government website. So the new guidance that have been issued does have links to worked examples. And I would stress the need to actually go through those and look at the examples and work out which apply to your employees and how to work it out. There is also an online calculator which has been updated to allow for calculations post 1st of July. So you could also use the online government calculator. It doesn't apply to every situation, so the variable hours and things like that, but it is a useful tool where you've got a classic situation to calculate how much furlough grant you're entitled to. But I will go through the high level key principles and the fundamental process that you need to follow. But again, I would just stress, unfortunately, there's nothing like sitting down and going through the worked examples. It did give me a flashback to the post-employment notice pay introduction, which wasn't healthy, to be honest, but it is that kind of calculation and something you just need to sit down and go through calmly. Hopefully your payroll provider, your payroll manager will be on it and will be able to do the calculations fairly easily. They're maths orientated, which you would hope they would be, but how do you fundamentally go through it? Well, step one, you need to identify the employee's normal working hours, which in theory could be fairly straightforward if they have standard hours every week. Though you do have to look at the relevant period that you're claiming the furlough scheme for. So if you pay monthly, obviously you'd look at the month, weekly, etc. So, but hopefully if they're 9 to 5 type employees, that may be fairly straightforward. Where you might have problems is if you've got variable hours, so employees' hours vary either on shift rotas or depending on how much work there is. If it's truly variable, so it's not a shift rotas, it just depends on how much work is available, then as with the fully furloughed scheme, so the existing scheme, you're going to have to look back to the previous tax year and look at either an average of the hours over that tax year or the relevant same period in the previous calendar year, so whether it's the month of March or whatever period you're looking at, and decide whichever is the higher and use that as average hours. So once you've identified an employee's normal working hours, keep that, put that to one side. You then need to look at and work out essentially a furlough rate of pay. So whether it's hourly or a day rate, you need to calculate and identify, okay, this is the maximum grant I could get for this employee. So that's the same as currently, whether it's the cap or due to their lower earnings. And you say, right, I could claim this amount for this employee if they were fully furloughed. So what's their normal working hours? Divide the full grant by the number of their normal working hours in that period and get yourself either an hourly rate or a daily rate of furlough pay. You've done that calculation, put that to one side. The next step is then to work out how many hours they've actually worked. And as James has just said, you will need in place an agreement with the employee as to how the flexible furlough is going to work. So it may be that you've agreed that they do a set amount of hours each week, so they have that certainty, or there might be some more flexibility there. The government has recognised that even if you have a set amount agreed with the employee, there may be situations where the employee works more hours in any given week. And they've stressed that the claim for the furlough payment needs to be based on the number of actual hours worked, not the agreement that you've reached. So if they work more hours than you've agreed, that needs to be taken into account. So you get the number of hours actually worked, and you need to keep, as James said, very clear records and have those available for 5 years to show how you've calculated this. And then you need to deduct those actual hours worked from the normal working hours, and the number of hours left are the furloughed hours. And you would then use the furlough rate of pay that you've calculated to multiply that up to assess how much furlough monies you can actually claim from the government. So naturally, the more actual hours they work and they receive full pay for, the reduction in the furlough grant that you can claim. This is obviously more complicated where you've got variable hours, and again, it's just looking at averaging and working that backwards. So I think, as I say, unfortunately, it's going to vary depending on the situation. how the hours of work, the agreement you've reached with the employee, and also what their normal working hours are. But there are lots of examples on the government website, so hopefully one of them will cover the situation that you are in.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rebecca. I think you did that very well. I've had an email while you've been talking. It was from Channel 4. It was the production company that produces Countdown. Rachel Riley, I think, is on maternity leave. And they said, would you step in for the next recording?
Absolutely not. No, I hate maths.
That didn't come through at all.
No, not at all.
No. Okay. What doesn't change? I've referred to this already. So we've got the grant. The grant is just guidance and some Treasury directions, which is the most we're going to get in terms of legislation that sits above all of the employment law, the case law, the legislation that we've got. What the government has never done with the job retention scheme is actually issue either primary or secondary legislation to give us certainty. And there will always be bits that change. I've lost track of the number of iterations we've had of the guidance, and we've had 2 Treasury directions, but fundamentally this is stuff that sits above, as I say, and flexible furlough is just another iteration of the guidance we've got about furlough, and it just allows us to pay people for the work they do. Some of you may have seen a post that I put on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago, which about the fraud that some interesting employers are doing, where they're claiming under the furlough scheme and just having the employees work notwithstanding. I think that HMRC isn't going to spend, I would guess, millions and millions looking at all of the employers to see whether there'll be fraud. There has been fraud, but undoubtedly they're going to pick some of the obvious targets, and there will be publicity on that. So that's going to be interesting. I think that when we're looking at what's going to happen going forward, I see, David, you asked a question about this on how is flexible furlough going to work and interact with, as it says on the slide, various other points, and then how is it going to play out in terms of the whole furlough scheme. So let's pick up redundancy rights. So we know this, that if I make an employee redundant, they're entitled to their statutory redundancy pay, and that will be their pre-furlough redundancy pay. So whether they are flexibly working during the furlough scheme or not, the statutory redundancy pay will be their normal pay pre-furlough. Holiday rights, if I take a week's holiday, so if I take a week's holiday and I'm not on furlough, I get paid my normal pay. On furlough, if I take a week's holiday, I get my normal pay. Part of that, up to the cap, will be paid for by the government. If I take a week's holiday during flexible furlough scheme, it's the same. So the employer will pay those hours worked. So the overall total, if it's say £200 for a week's holiday, then you will, I think this is going to get complicated, but then you will claim for the proportions will be the same. As much as it'll be £200, the employer will pay for those bits which the employee has worked and claim for the rest under the scheme. But fundamentally, because the scheme only pays the 80%, it will have to top up for those hours or days in that week when the employee is on furlough. So fundamentally, it's still £200. Now, notice will be interesting, and this is where I warn you, it gets quite complicated. So our view has long been that if I make an employee redundant during the operation of the job retention scheme, is it possible? Yes, it is possible. Ideally, you would use the scheme to offset the cost of notice. Do we think that's possible? Yes, we do. There are three ways to terminate someone's employment on there in this situation. So I can have them work their notice period, but on the furlough scheme. I can pay in lieu, or I can put them on garden leave. Our strong view is that pile-on, pay in lieu of notice, and garden leave would not enable you to use the grant, to use the job retention scheme, so therefore that would be 100% employer cost. But for working, that's inverted commas, this is a recording and you're just getting my voice, working, then you are in a situation where you're saying to an individual, you carry on furlough during your notice period. Now, our view is that the employer has to top up that to 100%. However, there is a piece of legislation called the Employment Rights Act, which most of you will have heard of, and there is a clause in there called Section 88. Some of you may have come across Section 88 in the context of a capability exit. Now, Section 88 is not a well-liked clause, I think it's fair to say, and it has complicated effects. Basically, it says that if an individual has a notice period by contract that is 1 week or more longer than their statutory notice, then they're only entitled in the notice period to what they would be normally entitled to receive. So that's a principle. Let me illustrate this. If an individual has worked for 2 years and therefore their statutory notice is 2 weeks, but their contract provides for 1 month's notice, their contractual notice is at least 1 week longer than their statutory notice. If that was the case, under Section 88, you would not have to pay that employee 100%. So you wouldn't have to top up. They would just get furlough pay for their notice. Similarly, sort of short service, someone's been with you for 20 years. If they've been with you 20 years, statutory notice, of course, would be a maximum of 12 weeks. But if they have 3 months notice by contract, again, their contractual notice is at least a week longer than their statutory notice. So again, there would be no top up. Compare that to the person who has been there 20 years and is on statutory notice only, so no 3 months notice. They would get the benefit of the top up the whole 12 weeks. And therefore, my query is, does this seem fair? So Rebecca, I said there was going to be a pop quiz for you, remember?
Oh no, yes.
So who said this? I'm going to read this one. Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
No, I don't know.
That was Jeff Goldblum playing the character of Dr. Ian Malcolm in Jurassic Park.
Oh, right, obviously.
So you knew that really, but it was just the moment. So I'm not just quoting Jurassic Park because I want to, but the significance of that is just because you can doesn't mean you should. So just because you could take advantage of Section 88 and therefore deprive somebody of the top up, my query is, do you want to? So the law says you can. Query, do you want to do that? It will have interesting effects depending upon the nature of your workforce and the length of your contractual notice periods. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm saying that the law is available there, that you can do that. Query whether you want to do that and the effect that will have. Okay, holiday pay is there in terms of nothing that's significantly changed. You can still require employees to take holiday even during flexible working. I'm going to say that that was complicated. Yes. I think the government could have made this clearer, perhaps with primary legislation. It hasn't done so. So we're going to have another poll. Sorry, Rebecca.
Can I just, before you do the poll, James, there's just been, I noticed a question on there around my last slide about whether you have to wait until the end of the period to claim the monies back from HMRC, because if it's based on actual hours work, then obviously if you do it in advance, there's the risk that you've overclaimed for furlough amounts. HMRC have referenced that in the guidance. We don't have clear details about it, but they have introduced, which isn't at the moment, as I understand it, an ability to potentially correct mistakes. So that hasn't been there previously. We don't know what that's going to look like, whether that's a deduction from your next month's furlough pay or whether you have to repay monies. They are trying to encourage employers to only submit claims once they know if there is the variation as to how much work will actually be done, because they don't want it to be the norm that you're having to repay monies or they don't seem to allow to claim more money. So it does just seem to be reclaiming the HMRC, you have to pay the money back. So there is reference to recognition that you may have submitted a claim in advance, but their strong encouragement is that you don't do that and you do wait till that you know exactly what the employees work. But I appreciate that won't always be possible depending on payroll runs and timing.
Okay, thank you for picking that up. Right, let's go back to my potential redundancies poll. So there we go. Have you started consulting about potential redundancies? Please vote now. Okay. Most of you have voted, 76% so far. That's stopping, so I'm going to end that. Okay, and share that. So, have you started consulting about potential redundancies? 36% of you have, 64% of you haven't. I think that's really interesting. So we are seeing instructions into Mills and Reeve from some pretty large employers who are absolutely in it. I think a lot of people were going to do it and then they extended the scheme, so I suspect it's coming, but I take a lot of heart from the fact that the majority of you haven't. I guess my follow-up question would be, is that because you're just not there yet, but it's still coming? We'll see. Okay. Moving on then. So we recognise that these are challenging times for employers. So this is a brief sales pitch. So we have thought about this. How can we support clients at this time? So in terms of undertaking collective consultation, because I think that is going to be happening, as I say, we have template letters and notices that allow you to know the legal bits fine. All you've got to do is plug in your rationale and adapt as necessary. So we can work with you and we can tailor that with you, or we can just say, hey, for a fixed price, here's a set of template letters. We can also do training for employee reps, as it says on the slide. So if you are using one of us to provide advice, typically we'll find another member of the team who is not involved on your matter, and therefore they are neutral and independent, and they can give online training for a fixed price to your employee reps so that they are better able to deal with the issues. And then, of course, as you would expect, we can support you in the process by giving you bespoke advice. Okay, is there any, before we move on from furlough, is there any specific questions we want to pick up, or should we do it at the end, Rebecca?
I think I picked up the one on my, should we maybe look at the end and go over it all?
Okay, fine. So let's move on to other news. Rebecca.
Okay, so for something different, because we just need a reminder that actually there is other legal issues in employment law other than furlough. I suspect for most of us, it feels like that furlough has been the main topic for the last few months. But we have had some guidance issued by the European Court of Justice in relation to the ongoing saga about status and the gig economy. So are they workers, are they self-employed contractors, or even are they employees? Usually the debate is between workers and self-employed contractors. And also just touch briefly on Uber. So, Yodel. James, next slide. We've seen from the ECJ, so they haven't actually made any decisions. They've just issued some guidance to the Employment Tribunal, who still need to reach a conclusion. But it is a helpful reminder of the factors that the tribunal do need to look at. So Yodel is a parcel delivery company. So they have various couriers and they employ them on a self-employed contractor basis. So they don't recognise them as workers, they see them as self-employed contractors. So in this case, the individual was classified as self-employed. He had to deliver the parcels within a specific window, but there wasn't a precise time. And he decided his route, etc. He was entitled to subcontract out the work, so he could get others to do it, but he had never actually exercised the right to do so. And he was also not required to exclusively work just for Yodel, so he could work for other delivery companies and deliver their packages at the same time as he was delivering Yodel packages. So it was literally simultaneously he could be working for two employers or businesses. So the ECJ looked at it And the guidance they gave is essentially negative. So when an individual cannot be a worker. So they've said a person can't be a worker where he can use subcontractors, where he can choose whether to accept or not a task. So he can legitimately turn around and say, I'm not doing any parcels today. He can provide services to other third parties, not just the one business. And he can fix his own hours within certain parameters. So recognising this, he has to deliver the parcel within a time window, but not an exact time. However, they stress that this will only mean that they're a worker, they're a self-employed contractor rather than a worker, where that arrangement isn't fictitious. So we'll see this, and I'll talk about it a bit more in Uber, but the idea that just because you've got a document that says he is entitled to that, he is entitled to subcontract, he can work for other businesses, is that a fiction in that actually in reality he never will do and won't actually be able to work for other competitors because he'll be so busy doing Yodel work. Also, those factors won't help you and won't make you a worker if it's not possible to show subordination. So this is the concept that you are so under the control of the business that essentially you are subordinate to them. You have to do as you're told, and there's that degree that makes you a worker rather than merely a self-employed contractor. So you don't have the freedom to determine how you do the work, when you do the work, etc. So again, it's a helpful reminder, and it'll be interesting to see which side of the line the employment tribunal come to now that they have to decide and they've had that guidance from the ECJ. It's going to be a difficult call for the tribunal to make, and again, unhelpfully, probably goes to show that there isn't ever going to be a clear-cut answer to this status issue, because trying to determine whether it's a fictitious arrangement or not, or whether it's just because someone's never done it before, does that mean they never would? It is quite a difficult call for a tribunal to make. So it's helpful guidance, but it doesn't give us the clear-cut dividing line that I think most employers and businesses would find useful. So that was Yodel, and we're also expecting, due to be heard in July 2020, the Uber case. So you may recall back in December 2018, before any of us even have heard of COVID-19, that Uber drivers had a big claim, and it was decided that actually they were workers, not self-employed contractors. Now, this was a significant issue for Uber and did have wide-reaching impacts across the rest of the gig economy as well, of quite a lot of businesses getting concerned about their status of their workforce. And understandably, Uber have appealed this to the Supreme Court, and that is due to be heard next month, July this year. So it'll be very interesting when we get that decision, because it could potentially make Uber's business model unsustainable due to the costs involved of having workers. So you've got holiday pay, sick pay, on top of where, if they were self-employed contractors, they wouldn't have those rights. So it will be hotly contested, and it will be interesting to see where it comes down, but it could have quite significant impacts for the gig economy.
Is it me, Rebecca, or does it seem surreal to be talking about this stuff 3 months into lockdown? Yeah, I know we had a period where it was all about furlough, and then we went back into business as usual. We're dealing with tribunal claims and all that stuff. To be talking to you guys today about non-furlough stuff, yeah, it's slightly surreal, but there we are. Okay. So family-friendly rights, just briefly on this. We've got some support coming, so neonatal, for every week that a neonatal baby that spends in neonatal care, then the parent who's an employee will get a statutory week's pay. I apologise if you can hear the washing machine going in the background, which is just reaching its crescendo of the spin cycle. If you can't hear it, great, because it's really bothering me. Carers, sorry, neonatal leave's coming 2023, we think. Carers leave, which is unpaid, a week for every year. No date yet for implementation of that. So possibly next year, but the government is slightly distracted. I think the interesting bit of it is, of course, flexible working. So last December, the Tories were talking about making flexible working the default, as it says on the slide, which is an interesting. So can the employer say, no, you must be office-based, and they'll need good reasons to do so. So instead of it being, well, it's this, but you may be able to make a flexible working request and we can reject it on these reasons. I think the pandemic has changed the world for all of us, and we're all working from home pretty much. So actually, if it's working for us, then why can't we work flexibly? We're seeing already, isn't it, house prices in Wales are already going up because I'm commuting to do whatever I need to do, because actually, well, as long as I can get decent broadband, I can live wherever I can work wherever I live. So I do think there will be huge pressure on flexible working, regardless of whatever the government does in relation to this and whether they make it the default or not. I suspect many offices and businesses will say, I don't need this space. There'll be a glut of office space on the market when break clauses come up. So I think that actually that we're going to see a shift regardless of what the government does in that respect. And then tribunal claims. So tribunal claims are continuing. So we are dealing with tribunal claims, but it's been a strange time. So we've had a roadmap in a FAQ document, which was issued, I think, on the 1st of June from the Environment Tribunal, saying this is how we propose to deal with the system. Now, I won't say the system is broken, because I think that's quite critical, but I will say it's under pressure. So what we're seeing is the tribunal is being slow to send out claims. So the claimant will put a claim in and the respondent won't receive that for potentially quite a long time. So they might think, well, no claim is coming. Lack of communication, lack of responses, people not answering the phone. And that's because, like every business or every organisation, the tribunal is suffering in the same way. So they haven't got people around and they've got too much to do. And even before lockdown, we had the tribunal system under severe pressure. So this has just exacerbated it. So what the tribunal judges have got together and thought about, actually, let's be clear, as you can see from this roadmap, how this is going to work out. So as you can see in June, well, they'll continue to do most things by telephone, some simple hearings using video, query whether that's really going to work and whether you're going to have, for example, decent cross-examination of somebody by video con. July and August, some more cases, mainly unfair dismissal, some in person. So we've got one coming up, I think, in the one of the other offices that is in person, obviously observing social distancing within the tribunal hearing. And then come the autumn, some more claims coming through. And then come November and December, really we're looking at, okay, are we back to normal, or are we going to be a further period of video hearings, only small hearings being dealt with? So what we are hearing is the listing time really varies depending upon which area you're in. So I had last month, I think it was, 3-day unfair dismissal was being listed in something like 18 months to 2 years away. So that is a very long time. Whereas I had a 2-day claim listed in January. So 6-7 months from the point of the preliminary hearing. So it is taking some time. So you're going to have some patience. From an employer perspective, great, it's pushing it out, kicking the can down the road, but you need to make sure your witnesses are still going to be around. And if your witnesses are going to be made redundant, then get signed witness statements from them now before that happens, and try and secure their cooperation for their attendance later if actually you need them on the day. Okay, let's look at some quick questions. So there was a question about furlough and holiday. Yes, you can ask someone or require someone to take holiday during furlough. As I say, if you do so, you can top up. Yes, the government says you can extend it for up to 2 years, but actually, if you want people to take the holiday whilst they're on furlough so that when you are able to have them back, they're actually around, then you can sort it so that not only can they elect to do so and get the top up, especially if you're only paying the 80% cap, or you can force them to take it so that they will be present and available, either because of flexible furlough or just when they come off furlough full stop and then become an employee back in the organisation. I'll also pick up Chris's. So he and I had some messages this morning. So in a collective consultation and also in a non-collective individual redundancy consultation, we may have a situation where the employer is proposing headcount reduction because it needs to save costs. In that scenario, it would be an obvious point for the employees to say, perhaps, well, there are other ways of saving costs which don't involve headcount reductions. And I've seen it with other clients in the past too, where they say, well, actually, if you reorganized the workforce or you reorganize the way that we do things, you could gain efficiencies here and there. One of those could be actually you go out and renegotiate your supplier contracts to get a better deal, because actually there are deals to be had at this time. And if you do that, that might save some or all of the redundancies. It might be quite interesting in involving your procurement teams on that. Any other questions, Rebecca, that we can pick up?
None that I've...
So Emma says, we have a member of staff who took off furlough on the 1st of June but couldn't afford to have her to come back full-time, so she's working part-time at a reduced salary. Would she be able to go on the flexible furlough scheme from 1st of July? There's a problem there in as much as if you've already agreed a reduction in their pay, then you can't just automatically put them on the furlough scheme at the at that rate, can you, Rebecca? I can't remember exactly what it says.
No, you'd have to be careful that you're not seen to be abusing the scheme of then agreeing having agreed a lower salary and then claiming back for the full salary. You could, as they've already been furloughed, the new entrant bar of 1st of July wouldn't apply, but the cap issues may come in.
So you could agree she comes back and off the reduced working, but she needed to have been furloughed pre 10th of June. Yeah.
Which
okay.
Will have been, because they've said that she,
yeah. Okay. I don't think that was... There's a difficult question about, can someone who's had two separate roles within one business be furloughed for one and not the other? So that's one employer, two jobs. I have to say, I'm not sure I know the answer to that.
I think they probably wouldn't. I don't think the furlough scheme's sophisticated enough to recognise, because they'll be on the same payroll. It'll be the same employer making the claim, but you could use the flexible furlough scheme to treat the one job as the work hours worked and the other as the part worked. I don't know if you'd have. It depends if there's two payroll numbers and all sorts, I suspect.
Yeah, if there's not two payroll numbers, then I think you might struggle, I have to say. Okay, so do give us some feedback on whether you've enjoyed it or not, or whether you'd like us to do some more of these. I don't think we'll be doing events in the office for some time, so webinars I think are probably the way we're going to communicate with you. So at 10:58, I'm going to say thank you very much, everybody, for attending and asking some really good questions. Thank you in particular to Rebecca for dealing with the how do I calculate flexible furlough. Appreciate it, and for co-presenting with me today. And I'm going to say thank you. Really appreciate your attendance, and have a great day, everybody. This is the end of the webinar.